Welcome to Hearths of Myths. Today, the warmth of the sun fades, and the ground grows cold beneath your feet. We are descending into the quiet heart of the world to walk the path of the Lord of the Unseen, Hades. The story of Hades begins long before the first shadow was cast upon the stones of the underworld, in an age where the rhythm of the cosmos was dictated by the heavy breathing of the Titans. To understand the king of the unseen, one must first descend into the ancient memory of the world, to a time when the sky and the earth were still vibrating from the violent succession of the primordial powers. The golden age of the Titans was not a time of peace, but a period of static, monumental power, ruled by Cronus, the youngest son of Uranus. Cronus sat upon a throne built of cold necessity and fear, haunted by the very blood he had spilled to attain his seat. He had heard the whispers of his parents, Gaia and Uranus, who spoke from the depths of the earth and the heights of the infinite sky. They prophesied that his reign, however grand, was a borrowed thing. They told him that just as he had overthrown his father, so too would one of his children rise to snatch the scepter from his grasp and cast him into the abyss. This prophecy was a poison that seeped into the mind of Cronus, turning his divine essence into a vessel of paranoia. When he looked at his wife and sister, Rhea, he did not see a partner or a queen. He saw a threat. He saw the potential for his own undoing in the fruit of her womb. Rhea was a goddess of fertility and flow, a being of immense tenderness who wished only to see life bloom. But as her first children began to arrive, she found herself trapped in a cycle of grief that echoed through the canyons of the world. First came Hestia, the warmth of the hearth, and Cronus, with a grim and silent resolve, swallowed her whole as soon as she crossed the threshold of birth. Then came Demeter, the abundance of the fields, and Hera, the majesty of the sky. Each child was taken by the Titan king, consumed by a father who believed he could bury the future within his own body. Hades was the fourth child born to Rhea and the first of the sons. His arrival was marked by a stillness that seemed to anticipate his eventual domain. In the accounts of Hesiod, he is described as the one with the pitiless heart, yet his beginning was defined by the ultimate form of helplessness. He was born into the light of the ancient world only for a fleeting moment, before the shadow of Cronus loomed over him. There was no cradle for the god of the dead, no sun-drenched hills to witness his first cries. Instead, there was the crushing descent into the dark gullet of his father. For a god, death is not a destination, but a state of being. Inside the stomach of Cronus, Hades was not destroyed. He was imprisoned in a space that defied the laws of geography and time. It was a cavern of living divinity, a place where the senses were muffled by the slow rhythmic pulse of the Titan's internal organs. One must imagine the atmosphere of that internal prison. It was a realm of heavy, liquid darkness. There was no wind, no stars, and no distinction between day and night. Hades existed there alongside his sisters, their divine auras, the only source of light in a void that felt like the bottom of a sunless sea. It was here, in this claustrophobic eternity, that the character of the unseen god began to take shape. While the world above continued to change under the iron rule of the Titans, Hades was learning the language of the silence. He was becoming accustomed to the weight of the unseen. He was the eldest son, yet he was hidden from the world he was meant to help govern. This period of imprisonment lasted for years, perhaps centuries, as time flowed differently within the body of a primordial being. The siblings were bound by a shared trauma, their voices echoing against the walls of their father's ribs, creating a silent bond that would eventually form the foundation of the Olympian order. Rhea's sorrow, meanwhile, had reached a breaking point. When she realized she was pregnant with her sixth child, Zeus, she could no longer endure the consumption of her lineage. She fled to the island of Crete, hiding in the deep, whispering shadows of a cave on Mount Ida. There, she gave birth to the youngest son in secret, leaving him to be raised by nymphs and protected by the clashing shields of the Curetes. To satisfy the hunger of Cronus, she wrapped a jagged stone in swaddling clothes and presented it to him. Cronus, blinded by his own arrogance and the belief that he had mastered fate, swallowed the stone without a second thought. He believed he had finally secured his throne, unaware that the stone was a cold precursor to his own downfall. Years passed, and Zeus grew in strength and wisdom, fueled by the desire to liberate his family. Through a combination of cunning and the counsel of the Titaness Metis, Zeus devised a plan to force Cronus to relinquish what he had stolen. A powerful emetic was prepared, a substance that would reverse the process of consumption. When Zeus eventually confronted his father and administered the draft, the physical reaction was a cosmic event. Cronus began to heave, the foundations of the world trembling with his tremors. First, he vomited the stone, the navel of the world, later placed at Delphi. Then, in an order that reversed their births, the gods emerged. Poseidon, then Hades, then Hera, Demeter, and finally Hestia. Hades stepped out from the darkness into a world he had never truly known. He was a fully grown god, his mind tempered by the long years of the void. While Zeus had known the sunlight of Crete and the freedom of the mountains, Hades had known only the internal pressure of a god's belly. He stood upon the earth, blinking in the harsh light of the new era, a being of somber dignity and hidden power. The siblings were now reunited, but they were also fugitives. They were gods without a kingdom, standing in the shadow of Mount Othrys, where the Titans remained entrenched in their ancient authority. The war that followed was not merely a battle for territory, but a struggle to define the laws of existence itself. The transition from the stomach of Cronus to the battlefield of the world was a moment of profound significance for Hades. He was no longer a victim of his father's fear. He was the embodiment of the very thing Cronus had tried to avoid. He was the ghost that had returned to haunt the king. In this early stage, before he was granted his throne in the underworld, Hades was a warrior of the shadows. He understood that the Titans could not be defeated by strength alone. They were the architects of the physical world, beings of immense scale and raw elemental force. To overcome them, the younger gods would need more than thunder and tridents. They would need the power to strike from where they could not be seen. The atmosphere of this pre-war period was one of electric tension. The air felt heavy, with the scent of ozone and the deep, low vibration of moving tectonic plates. The siblings gathered on Mount Olympus, a peak that reached toward the heavens, positioning themselves as the antithesis to the grounded, heavy power of Othrys. Hades, often silent during these councils, watched the horizons with an intensity that unnerved even his brothers. He was calculating the cost of the coming conflict. He knew that the war against the Titans would not be settled in a day or a year. It would be a 10-year cycle of devastation, a clash that would crack the very crust of the earth and boil the waters of the deep. During these early days, the identity of the gods was still fluid. they were collectively known as the Olympians, yet they had not yet claimed their specific domains. Hades was the eldest of the brothers, a title that carried weight in the ancient codes of the gods, yet he showed no desire for the spotlight. He was content to observe, to listen to the murmurs of the earth, and to wait for the moment when his peculiar talents would be required. He carried the wisdom of the darkness with him, a perspective that was fundamentally different from the bright ambition of Zeus or the turbulent energy of Poseidon. He was the depth to their height, the stillness to their motion. As the first salvos of the Titanomachy began, the universe seemed to hold its breath. The sun grew dim as the smoke from celestial fires filled the sky. The screams of the immortals echoed through the valleys, and the laughter of Cronus rang out from his fortress, confident that his sons could never breach the walls of the old order. But Hades was already looking past the walls. He was looking into the deep places of the world, into the pits of Tartarus, where his father had hidden the most dangerous and skilled prisoners of the cosmos. He knew that to win the war, they would have to descend once more, not into the belly of a god, but into the belly of the earth itself. This was the beginning of the great descent, a journey that would define the rest of his eternal life. Hades was moving toward his destiny, step by step, leaving the bright peaks of Olympus behind to find the tools of victory in the absolute dark. The narrative of his life is one of constant movement between the visible and the invisible, between the light of family and the shadow of duty. He was the god who walked where others feared to tread, the one who found strength in the places the world had forgotten. As Part 1 draws to a close, we see the young god standing on the precipice of the underworld, his eyes reflecting the cold fire of the stars, ready to claim the weapon that would make him the most feared name in all of mythology. The silence was over. The war of the gods had begun, and the shadows were finally beginning to move on their own accord. The Titanomachy was a war that lasted 10 full years, a duration that represents a cycle of cosmic restructuring. In the early years of the conflict, the younger gods found themselves at a stalemate. Mount Othrys, the stronghold of the Titans, was an impenetrable fortress of ancient stone and primordial energy. Cronus led his brothers, Iapetus, Hyperion, Coeus, and others, with a ferocity that seemed to eclipse the efforts of the Olympians. The Titans were the very substance of the world. They were the mountains, the celestial light, and the deep currents. To fight them was like fighting the wind or the tide. For a decade, the earth groaned under the weight of their combat. The forests were leveled by the movement of divine armies, and the oceans were churned into a frothing chaos. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades fought alongside their sisters and the few allies they had gathered, but they lacked the decisive advantage needed to break the Titans' grip on the universe. The turning point came not from a feat of strength, but from an act of liberation and the counsel of Gaia. Gaia, the grandmother of the gods, grew weary of the endless violence and the continued imprisonment of her other children, whom Cronus had kept locked in the depths of Tartarus. She whispered to Zeus that victory could only be found by descending into the abyss to free the elder Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires. These were the children of Uranus, whom Cronus had feared and discarded, beings of immense creative and destructive potential. Hades, familiar with the sensation of being buried and forgotten, was instrumental in this mission. He understood the terrain of the depths better than any of his kin. He was the one who could navigate the winding, airless tunnels that led to the doors of the great pit. The descent into Tartarus was a journey into the foundations of reality. It was a place where the air was thick with the scent of sulfur and the heat of the world's core. There, in the oppressive gloom, they found the three Cyclopes, Brontes, Steropes, and Argus. These were not the savage monsters of later legends, but master smiths of divine intellect. In gratitude for their release, the Cyclopes agreed to forge weapons of unprecedented power for the three brothers. For Zeus, they crafted the thunderbolt, a jagged spear of pure celestial fire that could shatter the armor of a Titan. For Poseidon, they created the trident, a three-pronged staff that could command the tremors of the earth and the fury of the sea. But for Hades, they crafted something far more subtle and terrifying. They did not give him a blade or a bolt of fire. Instead, they forged the Kyne, the helm of invisibility, often referred to as the helm of darkness. In the writings of Apollodorus, this artifact is described as a cap or helmet that granted the wearer the power to vanish from the sight of both mortals and gods. But the true nature of the helm was deeper than simple camouflage. It was fashioned from the very essence of the primordial void, a piece of the original darkness that existed before the first light was struck. When Hades placed it upon his head, he did not just become invisible, he became a shadow among shadows. He ceased to occupy space in the way other beings did. He became the unseen one, the god whose presence could be felt as a sudden chill in the air or a prickling on the skin, but who could never be cornered or caught. The psychological impact of the Helm of Darkness changed the dynamic of the war. While Zeus shook the heavens with thunder, and Poseidon tore the earth apart with his trident, Hades became the silent architect of the Titans' despair. According to some ancient accounts of the final battles, Hades used the helm to infiltrate the camp of the Titans on Mount Othrys. He moved like a ghost through the halls of his enemies, unseen by the watchful eyes of Hyperion or the keen senses of Atlas. He did not seek to engage them in open combat. Instead, he targeted their resources and their morale. He destroyed their armaments, sabotaged their defenses, and whispered fear into the ears of their sentinels. The Titans began to feel as though they were being hunted by a force that did not exist in the physical world. The certainty of their rule began to crumble as they realized that no wall could keep out the god of the unseen. The final battle of the Titanomachy was a cataclysm of such magnitude that the air itself was said to have burned. The Hecatoncheires, the 100-handed ones, joined the fray, each of the three giants hurling 100 boulders at a time, creating a barrage of stone that blotted out the sun. Zeus unleashed the full fury of his lightning, and Poseidon sent a tidal wave that reached the very gates of Othrys. Amidst this roar of elemental fury, Hades moved in the silence between the thunderclaps. He was the blade in the dark, the one who ensured that the Titan leaders were disoriented and vulnerable. The Titans were finally overwhelmed, not just by force, but by a coordinated assault on every level of existence: the sky, the sea, and the shadows. With the defeat of Cronus and his allies, the younger gods had to decide the fate of their predecessors. It was determined that the Titans who fought against Olympus would be cast into Tartarus, the very prison where they had once held the Cyclopes. Poseidon fashioned gates of unbreakable bronze to seal the abyss, and the Hecatoncheires were appointed as the eternal jailers of the fallen kings. The age of the Titans was over, and the age of the Olympians had begun. But the world was now a vast, unclaimed territory, and the three brothers had to find a way to govern it without falling into the same trap of jealousy and paranoia that had destroyed their father. In the famous passage from the 15th book of the Iliad, Homer describes how the three brothers decided to divide the cosmos. They did not argue or fight for the choicest realms. Instead, they turned to the ancient tradition of drawing lots. They placed 3 tokens in a helmet and shook it, trusting in fate to determine their jurisdiction. Zeus drew the first lot, granting him the high, bright expanse of the heavens and the authority to act as king of the gods. Poseidon drew the second, giving him the gray, turbulent seas and the power to move the earth. Hades drew the third and final lot. His portion was the dark, dismal realm of the underworld, the unseen territory beneath the roots of the mountains and the floors of the ocean. There is a common misconception that Hades was cheated, or that he was unhappy with his lot. However, when one examines the primary texts, there is a sense of cosmic symmetry in the distribution. Hades did not receive the underworld as a punishment. He received it because he was the only one capable of governing it. He was the one who had mastered the silence. He was the one who had carried the memory of the void within him since his birth. The underworld was not merely a place of death. It was the repository of all things hidden. It held the mineral wealth of the earth, the secret history of the ancestors, and the final resting place of every soul that had ever drawn breath. By claiming the underworld, Hades became the lord of riches, the one who oversaw the invisible foundations of the world. The name Hades itself is often interpreted as meaning the unseen one. This was not just a title, but a way of life. While Zeus established a court on Mount Olympus, filled with the drama of feasting, intrigue, and public spectacle, Hades retreated to his somber palace in the deep. He was the god who was not counted among the 12 Olympians in many traditions, not because he was lesser, but because he was different. He did not desire the worship of the living. He demanded the respect of the dead. His kingdom was vast, growing with every passing second as the mortal lives on the surface reached their inevitable conclusion. He was the only god who was truly certain of his subjects. The early days of his reign in the underworld were spent organizing the chaos of the abyss. The souls of the dead were arriving in a disorganized stream, and the geography of the afterlife was still shifting and wild. Hades set about the task with the same methodical precision he had shown during the war. He mapped the rivers, the Styx, the Acheron, the Cocytus, and established the boundaries that separated the living from the dead. He understood that for the universe to remain in balance, death had to be as ordered as life. He was not a judge of morality in these earliest myths, but a guardian of the border. He was the one who made sure that what had passed into his realm stayed there. This transition from warrior to king marks the end of his youth and the beginning of his eternal duty. Hades had moved from the belly of a god to the heart of a war, and finally to the throne of the abyss. He had secured his place in the triad of brothers who ruled the world. But as he sat in his silent hall, with the helm of darkness resting beside him, he realized that a king without a queen is a solitary figure. The shadows of his realm were vast, but they were also lonely. The next great chapter of his myth would not be defined by a war with gods, but by a pursuit of the heart, a story that would change the seasons of the earth forever. The unseen god was now the lord of the dead, and his reign would endure as long as the world continued to turn. To enter the realm of Hades is to surrender the warmth of the sun and the familiarity of the horizon. It is a journey that begins at the edges of the world, in places where the mist never lifts and the air carries the scent of damp earth and ancient minerals. The geography of the underworld is not a chaotic void, but a highly structured landscape, a subterranean mirror of the world above, dictated by laws as old as the Titans themselves. According to the accounts in Homer's Odyssey, the entrance to this realm lies beyond the deep-flowing river of Oceanus, in the sunless land of the Cimmerians. It is a territory of perpetual twilight, where the boundaries between reality and shadow begin to dissolve. As one descends, the path winds through limestone caverns and deep fissures in the earth's crust, leading toward the rivers that serve as the veins of the abyss. The first obstacle for any soul is the Acheron, the river of woe. This is the boundary line, a dark and sluggish flow of water that separates the land of the living from the eternal silence of the dead. The atmosphere here is thick with the sound of distant sighing, a low vibration that seems to come from the water itself. On the banks of the Acheron stands Charon, the ferryman of the dead. He is a figure of grim duty, his eyes burning with a cold inner fire, his beard matted with the dust of centuries. To cross his river, a soul must provide a token of passage, an obol placed in the mouth of the deceased by those who loved them. Those who arrive without this coin, or those who have been denied proper burial, are condemned to wander the gray banks for 100 years, their voices joining the melancholic chorus of the unmoored. Charon does not speak much. His role is not to comfort, but to transport. He is the first servant of Hades that a soul encounters, a reminder that in this realm everything has a price and a procedure. Beyond the Acheron lie the 4 other primary rivers, each defining a different aspect of the underworld's emotional and spiritual climate. There is the Cocytus, the river of lamentation, which is fed by the tears of the suffering. Its waters are cold and sharp, flowing into the Acheron with a sound like breaking glass. Nearby flows the Phlegethon, the river of fire. Unlike the fires of the surface, the Phlegethon does not consume what it touches with ash. Instead, it flows like liquid gold or molten lava, a river of heat and light that illuminates the dark tunnels of the deep. It is a river of punishment and purification, encircling the depths of Tartarus and ensuring that the most dangerous prisoners are kept within their bounds. In stark contrast to these is the Lethe, the river of forgetfulness. Souls destined for rebirth or those seeking peace are invited to drink from its quiet, silver waters. With a single sip, the memories of earthly joys and sorrows are washed away, leaving the mind as clear and empty as a winter sky. Finally, there is the Styx, the river of hatred and the boundary of oaths. The Styx is the most sacred of all waters, so powerful that even the gods on Olympus swear their most binding vows upon it. To break an oath sworn by the Styx is to face a year of breathless paralysis and 9 years of exile from the divine councils. The Styx wraps around the underworld 9 times, its black waters acting as the ultimate seal of Hades' authority. As the soul moves past the rivers, the landscape opens up into the Asphodel Meadows. This is the realm of the ordinary dead, the millions who lived lives of neither great virtue nor great evil. The asphodel is a pale, ghostly flower that blankets the plains in a shroud of gray and silver. There is no wind here, and no sun to make the shadows move. The souls in the Asphodel Meadows exist in a state of muted consciousness, flickering like the light of a dying candle. They are not in pain, but they are not in joy. It is a place of static eternity, where the weight of existence is replaced by a soft, weightless boredom. In the Odyssey, Odysseus describes how the spirits of his fallen comrades drifted through these fields like dry leaves, their voices thin and high, longing for a single drop of life-giving blood to remember who they once were. This is the heart of Hades' kingdom, the vast, silent majority of his subjects. In a secluded part of the underworld, hidden away from the gray plains, lie the fields of Elysium, also known as the Elysian Plain or the Isles of the Blessed. This is the destination for the heroic and the virtuous, those whose lives were marked by divine favor or exceptional morality. While the rest of the underworld is defined by shadow, Elysium is bathed in a soft internal light. The air is sweet with the scent of eternal blossoms, and the inhabitants spend their time in athletics, music, and conversation. It is a place where the sun and stars have their own light, and the grass is always green. However, in the earliest myths, Elysium was a rare destination, reserved for those related to the gods or the most legendary of heroes. It represents the hope that even in the kingdom of the dead, there is a place for the light. Opposite to the beauty of Elysium is the terrifying descent into Tartarus. If the underworld is the basement of the world, Tartarus is the sub-basement, a pit so deep that an anvil dropped from the heavens would take 9 days to reach the earth, and another 9 days to fall from the earth to the bottom of Tartarus. Hesiod describes it as a place of damp, sunless gloom, surrounded by a wall of bronze and a triple layer of night. It is here that the enemies of the divine order are kept, the Titans, the giants, and the mortals who dared to defy the gods. Tartarus is not merely a prison. It is a landscape of active punishment, where the terrain itself is designed to break the spirit of the rebellious. It is the realm over which Hades maintains the strictest guard, for he knows that the stability of the cosmos depends on the continued imprisonment of the primordial chaos. The palace of Hades stands at the center of this complex geography, a monumental structure of obsidian and gold. It is a place of somber majesty, where the hallways are lined with the treasures of the earth. Here, Hades sits upon his throne, not as a tyrant, but as a cosmic administrator. The silence of the palace is absolute, broken only by the scratching of a stylus on a tablet, as the records of the dead are updated. There is no laughter in these halls, but there is also no deception. In the underworld, all masks are removed, and the truth of a life is laid bare. The architecture of the palace reflects this. It is solid, unyielding, and eternal. One of the most striking features of Hades' domain is the presence of the 3 judges, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus. They sit at a crossroads where the paths to the Asphodel Meadows, Elysium, and Tartarus diverge. They are not gods themselves, but mortal kings who were granted their positions due to their legendary commitment to justice during their lives. Each soul must stand before them and give an account of their actions. The judgment is not based on wealth or status, but on the purity of the soul's essence. Hades himself rarely intervenes in these proceedings. He has delegated the task to those who understand the human condition most intimately. He is the ultimate authority, the one who oversees the execution of the sentences. But he remains a distant, objective figure, the silent observer of the soul's final transition. the flora and fauna of the underworld also contribute to its unique atmosphere. Aside from the ghostly asphodel, there are the groves of Persephone, black poplars and sterile willows that stand along the banks of the rivers. The animals of this realm are few, but significant. There are the black cattle of Hades, which graze in the shadows, and the screech owls that flit through the caverns. Most famous, of course, is Cerberus, the three-headed hound who guards the gates. Cerberus is not there to keep people out, but to keep them in. He is the physical manifestation of the boundary between life and death, a beast of raw, instinctual power who greets newcomers with a wagging tail, but devours anyone who attempts to return to the light. His three heads represent the past, the present, and the future, or perhaps the three stages of life that every soul has left behind. To understand the geography of the underworld is to understand the mind of Hades. It is a realm of absolute order, where every soul has a place and every action has a consequence. It is a world of echoes and shadows, but it is also a world of profound peace. For the ancient Greeks, the underworld was not a place to be desired, but it was a place that was respected. It was the final destination of the great journey, the place where the turbulence of life was stilled. As we move through these dark landscapes, we see that Hades is more than just a jailer. He is the architect of the ultimate sanctuary, the guardian of the earth's deepest secrets. The rivers of woe and fire are not just barriers. They are the filters through which the soul must pass to reach its final state of being. And in the center of it all, the unseen king watches, ensuring that the balance of the universe remains undisturbed. The story of the abduction of Persephone is perhaps the most famous myth in the Greek tradition. Yet, it is often misunderstood as a simple tale of kidnapping. When we look at the primary source, the Homeric hymn to Demeter, we find a narrative that is rich with theological complexity, elemental power, and a deep, melancholic beauty. It is the story of how the king of the unseen found a partner for his silent throne, and how that union fundamentally changed the relationship between the gods, the humans, and the earth itself. It begins in the lush, sun-drenched meadows of Nysa, where the young Persephone, known then as Kor, the maiden, was playing with the daughters of Oceanus. The air was filled with the scent of wild roses, crocuses, and violets, a scene of perfect, untroubled innocence. But this innocence was a fragile thing, and the gods above had already made their plans. Hades, in his solitary majesty, had grown weary of the silence of his halls. He desired a queen who could bring a touch of the living world to the abyss, a presence that could balance his somber authority. He approached his brother Zeus, the king of the gods, and asked for the hand of Persephone. Zeus, knowing that Demeter would never willingly let her daughter descend into the dark, gave his silent consent. He did not tell Demeter. Instead, he facilitated the moment of transition. He caused a magnificent flower to grow in the meadow, a narcissus of extraordinary beauty, with 100 blossoms springing from a single root. Its fragrance was so powerful that the whole wide sky above and the whole earth laughed, and the salty swell of the sea was moved. Persephone, drawn by the flower's singular brilliance, reached out to pluck it. This was the catalyst. As her fingers touched the stem, the earth groaned and split open. From the chasm emerged the golden chariot of Hades, pulled by immortal, coal-black horses. The king of the dead, clothed in the majesty of his dark power, seized the maiden and placed her beside him. Persephone cried out, a high, piercing sound that echoed through the mountains and the depths of the sea, calling for her father Zeus. But Zeus remained silent on Olympus, turning his head away from the scene. Only Hecate, in her cave, and Helios, the sun who sees all, heard the cry. In an instant, the chariot plunged back into the earth, and the gap closed, leaving nothing behind but the scattered petals of the narcissus and the fading scent of the underworld's cold air. Hades did not take Persephone with cruelty, but with an inevitable force. In the underworld, he treated her with the respect due to a sovereign. He offered her a throne and a share of his power. He told her that as his wife, she would be the mistress of all that lived and moved beneath the earth, and that all who had passed through the gates of death would honor her. But Persephone was consumed by grief. She missed the light of the sun, the touch of her mother, and the vibrant colors of the blooming world. She refused to eat or drink, her spirit wilting in the gray air of the palace. She was a being of the light trapped in the heart of the shadow, and her sorrow began to ripple outward, affecting the world of the living. Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, was devastated. For 9 days and nights, she wandered the earth with flaming torches in her hands, searching for her child. She did not eat ambrosia or drink nectar, and she did not bathe. Her grief was so great that she aged prematurely, her divine beauty hidden under a shroud of mourning. On the 10th day, Hecate met her and told her of the cry she had heard. Together they went to Helios, who confirmed the truth. Hades had taken the girl with the permission of Zeus. Demeter's sorrow turned to a cold, white rage. She felt betrayed by her own brother and husband, and she realized that the hierarchy of Olympus was indifferent to her pain. In protest, she withdrew from the divine company. She disguised herself as an old woman and wandered to Eleusis, where she sought refuge in the house of King Celeus. During her time at Eleusis, Demeter's presence brought a strange, heavy magic to the land. She attempted to make the king's son, Demophon, immortal, by placing him in the fire at night to burn away his mortality, but she was interrupted by the boy's terrified mother. Enraged, Demeter revealed her true form, her stature reaching the sky, and her radiance illuminating the house. She commanded that a temple be built in her honor, but her heart remained closed. She sat in her temple, pining for her daughter, and she forbade the earth to bring forth any fruit. The seeds remained hidden in the soil, and the plows turned the earth in vain. The white barley did not grow, and a terrible famine gripped the world. This was a challenge to the power of Zeus himself, for if the humans perished, there would be no one left to offer sacrifices to the gods. Zeus sent messenger after messenger to Demeter, first Iris, then all the other gods of Olympus, offering her gifts and honors if she would return and end the famine. But Demeter's resolve was unyielding. She declared that she would never set foot on fragrant Olympus, nor would she allow the earth to bloom until she had seen her daughter again. Realizing that he could not win this battle of wills, Zeus finally sent Hermes, the messenger god, to the underworld. Hermes descended into the depths, finding Hades and Persephone in the silent palace. He delivered the command of Zeus. Persephone must be returned to her mother to save the world from destruction. Hades, ever the pragmatist and the loyal brother, did not argue. He smiled a grim, subtle smile and told Persephone that she was free to go. He encouraged her to return to her mother with a kind heart, but he also reminded her of the power she would hold as his queen. But before she left, he performed a final calculated act. He He gave her a single pomegranate seed to eat. In the ancient laws of the underworld, to consume any food within the realm of the dead is to be bound to it forever. Persephone, in her excitement to return to the light, ate the seed, perhaps unaware of its significance. Or perhaps, as some interpretations suggest, she was beginning to feel the pull of the dark throne herself. Hermes drove the golden chariot back up to the world of the living, bringing Persephone to the temple at Eleusis. The reunion between mother and daughter was a moment of cosmic joy. The earth immediately began to respond to Demeter's happiness, with the fields turning green and the flowers bursting into bloom. But when Demeter asked if her daughter had eaten anything in the underworld, and Persephone revealed the secret of the pomegranate seed, the joy was tempered by the realization that the separation was not entirely over. A compromise had to be reached. It was decreed by Zeus and the Fates that Persephone would spend 2/3 of the year with her mother in the world of the light, and 1/3 of the year, the winter months, in the underworld with her husband Hades. This myth explains the cycle of the seasons, but it also establishes the dual nature of Persephone. She is the maiden of the spring and the Iron Queen of the dead. Her descent each year marks the time when the earth goes dormant, reflecting Demeter's mourning. Her return marks the spring, the rebirth of life from the cold soil. For Hades, the presence of Persephone transformed his kingdom. She became the mediator between the king and the souls of the dead. In many later myths, it is Persephone who is moved by the pleas of heroes like Orpheus, while Hades remains the silent, immovable force in the background. She brought a sense of cycle and rhythm to the static halls of the abyss. The abduction of Persephone also led to the establishment of the Eleusinian mysteries, the most sacred and secret religious rites of the ancient world. These mysteries promise the initiates a better fate in the afterlife, a way to find light even in the realm of Hades. The story of the descent and return became a map for the soul's own journey through death and toward a potential spiritual rebirth. It taught that death was not an end, but a part of a larger, necessary cycle. Hades, by taking a queen, had unintentionally provided a bridge between the mortal and the divine, between the grief of loss and the hope of return. The pomegranate seed was a small thing, but it bound the heavens and the earth together in a contract that would never be broken. As we look at the figure of Hades sitting beside his queen, we see that he is no longer just the god of the void. He is part of the great cycle, the guardian of the seed that must sleep in the dark before it can rise to the sun. The palace of Hades does not echo with the songs of bards or the laughter of guests. It is a monument to the absolute weight of existence, constructed from obsidian that seems to absorb the very idea of light, and reinforced with veins of raw gold and silver. The structure stands at the gravitational center of the underworld. It is here that the concept of divine administration takes its most rigid form. Unlike the palace of Zeus on Olympus, which is open to the shifting winds and the changing colors of the sky, the home of Hades is a place of stillness. The walls are thick, carved from the bedrock of the world, ensuring that the noise of the living never disturbs the concentration of the king. To sit upon the ebony throne is to accept a burden of knowledge that would crush a lesser being. Hades is the bookkeeper of the universe, the one who keeps the accounts of every breath ever taken and every word ever spoken. At the heart of this administrative machine are the three judges, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus. They are the conduits through which the justice of Hades flows. These three figures were once mortal kings. men who were celebrated during their time on earth for their unwavering commitment to the law. Minos, the former king of Crete, holds the golden scepter of final judgment. In his mortal life, he was the architect of a legal system that stabilized an empire, and in death, he remains the one who settles the most difficult disputes. He is a figure of cold, intellectual rigor, looking past the excuses and the facades of the souls who stand before him. Beside him is Rhadamanthus, his brother, known for his extraordinary piety and his role as the judge of the souls from the east. He is often associated with the governance of Elysium, the one who recognizes the spark of true virtue in the midst of a world of shadows. The third is Iacchus, the son of Zeus and the former king of Aegina. He was so beloved for his honesty that the gods themselves often sought his counsel. In the underworld, he judges the souls of the West and guards the keys to the kingdom. The process of judgment is not a trial in the way mortals understand it. There are no lawyers to argue for the soul, and no appeals to a higher court. When a spirit stands at the crossroads, where the three paths diverge, the judges perceive the truth of that spirit's essence as clearly as a diamond in a dark room. The soul is stripped of its titles, its wealth, and its physical beauty. A king stands as naked as a beggar, and a hero stands as vulnerable as a child. The judges look for the weight of the spirit, the accumulation of choices made in the light. This is where the meticulous nature of Hades' rule becomes apparent. He does not demand perfection, for he knows the frailty of the human condition, but he demands honesty. The bureaucracy of the soul is a system of balance. If a life was lived in harmony with the laws of the gods and the needs of the community, the path leads to the silver air of the asphodel meadows, or the golden light of Elysium. If the life was a sequence of cruelty and pride, the path descends toward the heavy shadows. One must consider the role of the Furies, or the Erinyes, who dwell within the vicinity of the palace. These are the ancient goddesses of vengeance, born from the blood of Uranus that spilled upon the earth. While they are often depicted as terrifying monsters with snakes for hair and eyes that weep blood, they are, in fact, essential servants of Hades' justice. They are the enforcers of the moral law. They do not hunt the innocent. They are triggered by the violation of the most sacred oaths and the spilling of kindred blood. In the halls of Hades, they stand as a reminder that the consequences of an action cannot be outrun, even by death. They represent the internal torment of a guilty conscience made manifest. When a soul is sentenced to the depths, it is the Furies who ensure that the weight of their sins is felt with every passing second of eternity. They are the shadows that never sleep, the heartbeat of the underworld's law. Hades himself rarely speaks during these proceedings. He sits upon his throne, his hands resting on the pommel of his scepter, watching the flow of souls with an intensity that is both terrifying and comforting. He is the ultimate witness. He is called Polydector, the host of many, because his hospitality is universal and inescapable. Every soul that has ever existed is a guest in his house, and he takes this responsibility with a gravity that borders on the religious. To Hades, the dead are not mere numbers or shades. They are the legacy of the world. He preserves them. He is the guardian of memory. While the world above is quick to forget, burying the past under the noise of the new, Hades holds every memory in a grip of iron. Nothing is truly lost in his kingdom. It is only stored, catalogued, and placed in its proper context. The atmosphere of the palace reflects this sense of eternal preservation. The hallways are decorated with scenes from the history of the universe, not painted on the walls, but carved into the stone itself so that they can never fade. There are rooms filled with the names of the fallen, and vaults containing the treasures that were buried with the great kings of old. But these treasures are not used for display. They are kept as part of the weight of the earth. Hades is also known as Pluton, the Lord of Riches, because he is the master of everything that lies beneath the surface. This includes the seeds of the grain that sleep in the winter soil, and the precious metals that humans fight and die for. He understands that true wealth is not found in what is spent, but in what is held. He is the god of the reserve, the one who possesses the capital of existence. In this silent bureaucracy, the figure of Hermes Psychopomp is the vital link. Hermes is the only god who moves freely between the height of Olympus, the bustle of the earth, and the stillness of the abyss. He is the one who guides the souls to the banks of the Acheron, acting as the primary scout for the kingdom of Hades. Hermes and Hades have a relationship built on a shared understanding of boundaries. While Hermes is a god of transition and movement, Hades is a god of the destination. Hermes brings the message. Hades is the final word. When Hermes enters the palace, the air shifts slightly, bringing a fleeting scent of the mountain wind and the sunlit fields into the obsidian halls. Hades listens to the reports from the surface, keeping his finger on the pulse of the living world, but he never follows Hermes back into the light. He knows that his place is at the center, the anchor of the great chain of being. The justice of Hades is also seen in his treatment of the exceptional. He is the one who oversees the eternal punishments of the great sinners, Tantalus, Sisyphus, and Ixion. These are not acts of cruelty for the sake of suffering. They are cosmic lessons in the futility of defying the natural order. Tantalus, who tried to deceive the gods at a feast, is forever surrounded by food and water that recedes from his touch, a punishment for his insatiable and twisted appetite. Sisyphus, who tried to cheat death through trickery, is condemned to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity, only for it to fall back down just as he reaches the top, a manifestation of the wasted effort of a life built on lies. These punishments are public, in the sense that they are known to all souls, serving as the pillars of the underworld's moral architecture. They demonstrate that in the realm of Hades, the punishment is always the logical conclusion of the sin itself. As we look at the figure of the king in his silent hall, we see a being of immense discipline. It would be easy for a god with such power to become a tyrant, to use the souls of the dead as playthings, or to lash out at the living in envy. But Hades shows a remarkable lack of ego. He does not demand temples in every city. He does not seek to be loved. He is content to be the unseen foundation. He understands that the universe requires a place of finality, a place where the noise ends and the truth begins. He is the stillness at the end of the song, the darkness at the end of the day. The silent tribunal and the ebony throne are not symbols of fear, but symbols of the ultimate peace that comes when justice is finally served and the soul is allowed to rest in its designated place. In the house of Hades, everyone is eventually seen for who they truly are, and that, perhaps, is the most profound justice of all. The interactions between Hades and the heroes of the living world are among the rarest and most significant events in all of mythology. For a mortal to descend into the underworld and return is to achieve the ultimate victory over the human condition. Yet this journey is never possible without the explicit or implicit permission of the king of the dead. Hades is not a god who can be tricked by strength or intimidated by fame. He is a god who respects the order of things. When the hero Heracles, the son of Zeus, was commanded by King Eurystheus to perform his 12th and final labor, to bring the three-headed hound Cerberus from the gates of the underworld to the world of the light, it was a challenge that threatened the very boundaries between the realms. This was not just a test of muscle, but a diplomatic and spiritual crisis that required Heracles to face the unseen one in his own seat of power. Heracles began his descent at Taenarum, guided by the wisdom of the mysteries he had been initiated into at Eleusis. He moved through the shadows with the skin of the Nemean lion draped over his shoulders, a symbol of his terrestrial triumphs. When he finally stood before the Ebony Throne in the Obsidian Palace, he did not draw his sword or string his bow. He understood that in this place, physical violence was a secondary language. Hades sat in his customary silence, his dark eyes observing the mortal who had crossed the river of woe while still breathing the air of the sun. Heracles made his plea with a humility that was uncharacteristic of the great bruiser of legends. He explained the command of Eurystheus and the weight of the tasks he had performed to atone for his past sins. He asked for the hound, not as a trophy, but as the final key to his own liberation. The response of Hades was a testament to his cold, objective fairness. He did not refuse Heracles, nor did he make it easy. He gave the hero a condition. He could take Cerberus if, and only if, he could master the beast using nothing but his bare hands. No club, no arrows, and no divine armor. Hades was testing whether the hero's strength was purely physical, or if it was tempered by the spirit. He was also protecting his servant. If Cerberus could be defeated by a man's naked strength, then the man was worthy of the task. Heracles accepted the terms. The struggle that followed near the gates of Acheron was a primal collision of forces. Cerberus, with his 3 heads snapping, and his serpent tail lashing, fought with the fury of the abyss. But Heracles, fueled by a decade of suffering and the desperate need for redemption, locked his arms around the beast's necks and did not let go until the hound was subdued. What is often overlooked in this myth is the grace Hades showed in the aftermath. He allowed the hero to lead the hound through the upper tunnels and into the sunlight of the Peloponnese, where the terrified Eurystheus hid in a bronze jar at the sight of the monster. After the task was completed, the hound was returned to the underworld, the boundary restored. But this was not the only time Heracles and Hades crossed paths. In a much darker and more obscure tradition recorded in the 5th book of the Iliad, Homer mentions a moment when Heracles actually wounded the god of the dead. This occurred during the siege of Pylos, when the gods descended to the battlefield to support their respective favorites. In the chaos of the divine clash, Heracles drew his bow and struck Hades in the shoulder with an arrow. This moment is profound, because it is one of the few instances where a god of the highest tier experiences physical pain at the hands of a mortal. Hades, the lord of the indestructible realm, found himself bleeding the golden ichor of the immortals. He did not stay on the battlefield to seek revenge. Instead, he fled to the high peaks of Olympus to seek healing from Paeon, the physician of the gods. The image of the king of the underworld, standing among the bright, airy halls of his brothers, his shoulder pierced by a mortal's shaft, is a haunting depiction of the vulnerability that even the most powerful beings face when the cosmic order is disrupted. It was a wound that healed, but it left a mark on the relationship between the underworld and the world of heroes. It reinforced the idea that Hades belonged in the shadows, and that when he stepped into the light of human conflict, even he could be touched by the sting of mortality. There is a stark contrast between Heracles' encounter and the ill-fated journey of Theseus and Pirithous. These two heroes, driven by an arrogance that bordered on madness, descended into the underworld with the intention of kidnapping Persephone herself, so that Pirithous could have a divine bride. They entered the palace of Hades, not as supplicants, but as thieves of the most sacred kind. Hades, sensing their intent long before they reached his doors, received them with a terrifyingly calm hospitality. He invited them to sit and feast, gesturing toward 2 stone chairs carved from the bedrock of the abyss. As soon as the heroes sat down, the stone began to grow around their limbs. The chairs of forgetfulness bound them with coils of living rock, and the memory of their lives and their purpose began to drain away into the cold earth. Theseus and Pirithous remained there for years, becoming part of the furniture of the underworld, a silent warning to any who would treat the realm of death as a place for sport or plunder. It was only when Heracles returned during his 12th labor that Theseus was liberated. Heracles pulled Theseus from the chair with such force that a portion of the hero's flesh remained stuck to the rock, explaining why, in the Greek imagination, the descendants of Theseus were said to have remarkably lean thighs. But when Heracles tried to rescue Pirithous, the earth began to tremble with the unmistakable disapproval of Hades. The king had decided that Pirithous, the architect of the plan, would remain forever. Heracles, respecting the limit of his influence, left his friend behind. This story illustrates the binary nature of Hades' character. He is capable of great mercy for those who follow the rules, and absolute immovable severity for those who break them. The presence of Hades in the myths of heroes is almost always a moment of profound transformation. Whether it is Orpheus seeking Eurydice or Heracles seeking Cerberus, the encounter with the king of the dead serves as the ultimate threshold. Hades is the one who holds the mirror up to the hero's soul. He asks them, through his silence and his challenges, what they are willing to sacrifice for their desires. He is the guardian of the finality that gives life its meaning. Without the shadow of Hades, the triumphs of Heracles would be hollow, for a victory is only great if the stakes are eternal. Hades provides the stakes. He is the weight that balances the scales of legend. One must also consider the symbols of power that Hades displayed during these encounters. When he met Heracles, he was often depicted with his bident, a 2-pronged spear that mirrored the trident of Poseidon, but represented the duality of life and death. He was accompanied by the screech owl and the cypress tree, symbols of mourning and the unchanging nature of the grave. Yet, even in his most formidable moments, there is a sense of lonely dignity. He is a king who rules over those who cannot love him, and who interacts with the living only when they force their way into his presence. He is the ultimate introvert of the pantheon, a being who finds his strength in his isolation. The wound at Pylos and the labor of the hound together create a complex portrait of a god who is both vulnerable and invincible. He is vulnerable because he is part of the connected fabric of the gods, affected by the violence of the world. He is invincible because his kingdom is the only one that is guaranteed to grow. Every hero who wounds him, every hero who steals a dog or a soul from his gates, will eventually return to him. Heracles himself despite his divinity, had to shed his mortal skin on a funeral pyre before he could ascend, and a portion of his shadow was said to remain in the underworld, even while his spirit lived on Olympus. Hades knows this. He can afford to be patient. He can afford to be fair. For in the end, all roads lead to the Obsidian Palace, and the king will always be there, waiting to collect the debt that every living thing owes to the earth. The silence of the underworld is not a hollow vacuum. It is a dense, layered thing, built from the accumulation of billions of unspoken words and the weight of finished lives. To disturb this silence is an act of cosmic defiance. Yet there was once a moment when the absolute stillness of the Obsidian Palace was shattered by a sound that did not belong in the realm of the dead. This was the music of Orpheus, the son of the muse Calliope, a mortal whose ability to manipulate the vibrations of the soul was so profound that even the rocks and trees of the living world were said to follow his path. When his bride, Eurydice, was taken by the sting of a serpent on their wedding day, Orpheus did what no grieving mortal had ever dared to do with such pure intent. He did not merely mourn. He carried his lyre across the threshold of the living and descended into the heavy mists of the abyss, seeking to bargain with the king of the unseen, using the only currency he possessed: beauty. As Orpheus moved through the dark passages, the geography of Hades responded to his presence in a way that defied its own laws. The Acheron, usually a river of sluggish woe, seemed to pause in its flow as the strings of the lyre vibrated against the damp air. Charon, the grim ferryman who had seen every form of human sorrow, found his hand hesitating on the oar, drawn by a melody that spoke of a light he had forgotten. When Orpheus finally reached the central hall of the palace and stood before the thrones of Hades and Persephone, he did not offer a speech or a plea. He struck the silver strings and began to sing. In the accounts of Ovid, the effect of this music was a temporary suspension of the cosmic order. The Furies, the iron-hearted enforcers of vengeance, felt their cheeks grow wet with the first tears they had ever shed. The wheel of Ixion stopped turning. The rock of Sisyphus remained balanced on the slope, and the thirst of Tantalus was forgotten. For a few fleeting minutes, the machinery of punishment and process ground to a halt. Hades, the king who had never been moved by prayers or sacrifices, sat in a state of uncharacteristic stillness. Beside him, Persephone felt the ache of her own seasonal exile reflected in the mortal's song. The music of Orpheus was not a challenge to Hades' authority. It was a bridge that connected the grief of the living with the permanence of the dead. It was a reminder that even in the abyss, the memory of love remains a vital, pulsing force. For the first and only time in the history of his reign, Hades was moved to mercy. He understood that the bond between Orpheus and Eurydice was a thread that even the fates had not intended to cut so abruptly. He agreed to release the soul of Eurydice, but his mercy was tempered by the logic of his realm. He imposed a single, absolute condition. As Orpheus led his bride back to the world of the sun, he must walk ahead of her and never look back until they had fully crossed the boundary. If he turned his eyes toward her even for a second, the contract would be void, and she would belong to the shadows forever. The ascent was a journey through the most difficult terrain of the spirit. They moved through the airless tunnels in a silence that was more oppressive than the darkness. Orpheus could hear his own heartbeat and the scrape of his sandals on the stone, but he could not hear the footsteps of Eurydice. As a shade, she moved without weight, a flicker of essence behind him. The temptation to look back was a physical pressure, a doubt that gnawed at his resolve. Was she really there? Had the king of the unseen played a cruel trick on him? As the first faint light of the upper world began to gray the horizon of the tunnel, the anxiety became unbearable. Just as Orpheus stepped into the air of the living, he turned his head to share the moment of triumph with his bride. He saw her for a fraction of a second, a pale, loving face framed by the shadows, before she was pulled back by an invisible tide. She uttered a final, soft farewell that barely reached his ears before the darkness swallowed her once more. Hades did not reach out with a hand of iron to snatch her back. He did not need to. The law of his realm was self-executing. By looking back, Orpheus had chosen the memory of the light over the reality of the shadow, and in doing so, he had violated the sanctity of the transition. The king of the dead remained in his palace, unmoved by the second wave of Orpheus's grief. The deal had been made, the terms had been clear, and the order of the universe had been restored. This myth serves as a profound meditation on the nature of Hades' authority. His mercy is real, but it is not a reprieve from the laws of existence. He granted Orpheus the opportunity to transcend death, but the hero's own human frailty ensured that the boundary remained intact. Hades is the god who provides the opportunity for truth, but he does not protect humans from the consequences of their own nature. The aftermath of this encounter left a lingering melancholy in the halls of the palace. The music of Orpheus had left a mark on the spirit of Persephone, strengthening her role as the compassionate advocate for the souls of the dead. From this point on, she was often seen as the one who could be reached when the king was silent. But for Hades, the event reaffirmed his belief in the necessity of the divide. He saw that even the greatest mortal art could not bridge the gap between what was and what is. He remained the guardian of the finality. He had allowed the silence to be broken, and he had seen the beauty of the song, but he also saw that the song must eventually end. The lyre in the void was a beautiful anomaly, a spark in the dark that only served to emphasize the depth of the surrounding night. One must consider the theological implications of Orpheus's descent. It established the idea that the underworld was a place that could be navigated through spiritual purity and the power of the soul, rather than just physical strength. It laid the groundwork for the Orphic Mysteries, a religious movement that sought to teach humans how to prepare for the journey through Hades' realm. The followers of Orpheus believed that by living a life of asceticism and learning the correct passwords for the gatekeepers, they could avoid the gray mists of the asphodel and find their way to the light of Mnemosyne, the pool of memory. Hades, in his objective wisdom, allowed these mysteries to flourish. He did not fear those who prepared for his kingdom. In fact, he respected the order they brought to the transition. As the echoes of the lyre faded, the underworld returned to its rhythmic, silent pulse. The rivers resumed their flow, the judges returned to their tablets, and the souls continued their gray wandering. But the story of Orpheus remained a part of the palace's history, carved into the collective memory of the Shades. It told them that their king was not a monster, but a being who understood the weight of the human heart. He was the one who had listened. He was the one who had given them a chance. And if they failed as Orpheus had failed, it was not because the god was cruel, but because the path of the soul is the most difficult journey of all. The melancholy of the unseen king is the melancholy of a being who sees the potential for beauty in every soul. but knows that most will succumb to the gravity of their own shadows. In the deepest reaches of the underworld, where the air is heavy with the scent of ozone and the heat of the earth's core, lie the monuments of the great sinners. These are not merely individual prisoners, but the pillars of a moral philosophy that Hades oversees with unyielding precision. The punishments of Tartarus are often seen as acts of divine cruelty, but in the context of Greek mythology and the primary accounts in the Odyssey and the works of Pindar, they are understood as the logical extensions of the sins committed in life. Hades does not invent these tortures to satisfy a personal grudge. He implements them to restore the cosmic balance that these individuals sought to shatter. Each punishment is a mirror, reflecting the exact nature of the crime and the spiritual failure of the criminal. The most famous of these is Sisyphus, the former king of Corinth, a man whose cleverness was matched only by his arrogance. Sisyphus had committed the ultimate crime against the order of the gods. He had tried to outwit death itself. When Hades sent Thanatos, the personification of death, to claim him, Sisyphus managed to trap the entity in shackles, leading to a period where no living thing could die. The world fell into a chaotic stasis until Ares intervened to free Thanatos. Later, Sisyphus used another trick, telling his wife not to perform the proper funeral rites so that he could complain to Persephone and be sent back to the world of the living to punish his wife's negligence. Once, back in the sunlight, he refused to return to the shadows until he died of old age. The response of Hades to this sustained defiance was the creation of a punishment that is the perfect antithesis to the hero's life of trickery. Sisyphus is condemned to roll a massive boulder up a steep hill in the depths of Tartarus. Every time he nears the summit, just as the goal is within reach, a supernatural force causes the stone to slip from his grasp and thunder back down to the plain below. Sisyphus must then descend, his shoulders aching and his spirit broken, to begin the labor again. This is the punishment of futility. Sisyphus spent his life trying to control the uncontrollable, trying to push the stone of his destiny uphill through lies and manipulation. In the underworld, Hades grants him exactly what he wanted: a life of endless effort and the illusion of progress, stripped of all meaning. The stone is the weight of his own ego, and the hill is the impossible climb toward a divinity he can never reach. Nearby stands Tantalus, once a favored guest at the table of the gods. Tantalus committed a sin of insatiable appetite and ultimate betrayal. He stole ambrosia from the divine table to give to mortals, and more horrifically, he murdered his own son, Pelops, and served him as a feast to the Olympians to test their omniscience. His crime was a violation of the sacred bond of hospitality and the sanctity of life. Hades placed him in a pool of clear, cool water that reaches his chin, with branches of succulent fruit hanging just above his head. Whenever Tantalus bends his parched lips to drink, the water recedes into the earth, leaving only dark mud. Whenever he reaches his trembling hand for the fruit, pears, apples, and sweet figs, the wind whisks the branches away into the gray mists. Tantalus suffers from eternal hunger and thirst in the midst of abundance. This is the punishment of the hollow spirit. In life, Tantalus had everything: divine favor, a kingdom, and wealth. Yet he hungered for more, seeking to prove himself superior even to the gods. Hades has made his internal state external. He is the man who can never be satisfied, the one who is surrounded by beauty, but can never touch it, because his own nature has made him a void. The stillness of the water and the swaying of the branches are a silent rebuke to his greed. Hades does not need to strike him. The presence of the things he desires is the strike itself. Then there is Ixion, the first mortal to shed the blood of a kinsman, and one who attempted to seduce Hera, the queen of the gods. Ixion was a man who lacked all restraint, a being of pure destructive impulse. His punishment is to be bound to a wheel of fire that spins through the air of Tartarus for all eternity. The wheel is a symbol of the cycle of violence and the uncontrolled momentum of his own passions. In life, Ixion was a man who could not be centered, who moved from one atrocity to another without pause. In the realm of Hades, he is fixed to the very motion he chose. He is the center of a storm of his own making, a figure of perpetual agitation, who can never find the stillness that Hades himself embodies. One must also consider the Danaids, the 49 daughters of Danaus, who murdered their husbands on their wedding night. Their punishment is to fill a giant vessel with water, but the vessel is riddled with holes, and the pitchers they carry are porous. They work in a rhythmic, frantic line, pouring water into the basin only to watch it drain into the parched soil of the underworld. This is the punishment of the broken vessel. By killing their husbands, they destroyed the potential for a future and the structure of the family. They chose a path that leads to nothingness, and so Hades has given them a task that produces nothing. Their labor is a visualization of a life drained of its purpose, a repetitive motion that reflects the emptiness of their act. Hades oversees these punishments with a cold, administrative objectivity. He is not a sadist who enjoys the screams of the damned. He is a judge who ensures that the sentence is carried out to the letter. He understands that Tartarus is a necessary part of the cosmic architecture. If the wicked were not punished, the virtue of the righteous would have no meaning. These punishments are the anchors of moral reality. They tell the souls in the asphodel and the heroes in Elysium that the universe is a place of order, and that the laws of the gods are not suggestions. Hades is the one who maintains the integrity of the why. Why be good? Because in the house of Hades, the truth of your nature will eventually become your environment. The philosophy of punishment in Hades' realm is deeply tied to the idea of ananke, or necessity. It is necessary that Sisyphus rolls the stone, just as it is necessary that the sun rises. Hades is the servant of this necessity. He does not show anger toward these sinners. He shows them the reality they created for themselves. The silence of Tartarus is broken only by the sound of the stone, the splashing of the water, and the whirring of the wheel. These sounds are the heartbeat of justice. They are the reminders that in the unseen kingdom, nothing is forgotten, and everything is balanced. As we move away from these scenes of ebony suffering, we see that Hades is the ultimate realist. He knows that most souls are neither as clever as Sisyphus, nor as wicked as Tantalus. Most souls are simply lost. But for the few who truly challenge the order of things, he provides a destination that matches their ambition. He is the king who turns the pride of man into the labor of eternity. He is the guardian of the abyss, ensuring that the darkness stays where it belongs, and that the light of justice shines even in the deepest pit. The weight of the stone is the weight of the law, and in the hands of Hades, that law is never dropped. The boundaries of the underworld are meant to be a one-way threshold, a cosmic seal that ensures the stability of the living world. However, history is marked by those whose arrogance leads them to believe they can navigate the abyss and return as though they had merely stepped through a garden gate. Among the most striking examples of this divine overreach is the descent of Theseus, the legendary king of Athens, and his companion Pirithous, the king of the Lapiths. According to the accounts in Plutarch's Life of Theseus and the Bibliotheca of Apollodorus, these two heroes had entered into a reckless pact born of middle-aged restlessness and a desire to possess the most divine women of the era. Theseus had already taken the young Helen of Sparta, and Pirithous, not to be outdone, chose the most dangerous bride imaginable, Persephone, the Iron Queen of the dead. This was not a quest for wisdom or a labor of atonement. It was an act of raw hubris, a direct assault on the sanctity of Hades' marriage and his kingdom. The journey of Theseus and Pirithous into the deep places of the earth was marked by an unnatural ease. Hades, who usually guarded his borders with the ferocity of Cerberus, allowed them to pass through the mists of the Acheron without challenge. He knew of their intent long before they reached the gates of his palace. He did not send the Furies to drive them back, nor did he shake the earth to bury them. Instead, he chose to employ a psychological warfare that reflected the very nature of the underworld. He understood that the greatest punishment for those who seek to steal from the divine is to grant them exactly what they think they want, only to strip away the meaning behind it. When the two heroes stood before him, Hades greeted them with a mask of cheerful, almost unsettling hospitality. He invited them to sit and rest their weary limbs before discussing their bold request. He gestured toward two stone chairs that were carved directly from the living bedrock of the abyss, the Lethargos, or the chairs of forgetfulness. Theseus and Pirithous, perhaps disarmed by the king's calm demeanor, or perhaps simply exhausted by the heavy air of the deep, accepted the offer. As soon as their skin made contact with the cold stone, the trap was sprung. This was not a physical binding with ropes or chains. It was a biological and spiritual integration. In some versions of the myth, coils of serpents rose from the shadows to bind them, but in the more haunting descriptions, the stone itself began to grow and fuse with their flesh. Their muscles became one with the obsidian, and their divine ichor began to slow, matching the rhythmic, tectonic pulse of the earth. The true horror of the chairs of forgetfulness lay in their name. As the heroes sat, the memory of their lives, their triumphs, their families, and even the very reason for their journey, began to leak away into the surrounding darkness. They did not experience pain in the traditional sense. They experienced a profound, weightless erasure. Theseus, the man who had navigated the labyrinth and defeated the Minotaur, found his mind becoming as empty and gray as the asphodel meadows. Pirithous, the architect of the plan, was reduced to a blank stare, his ambition dissolving into the airless silence of the palace. They became permanent fixtures of the hall, living statues that served as a silent commentary on the futility of human pride. Hades continued his administrative duties around them, ignoring their presence as if they were nothing more than pillars supporting the roof of his obsidian home. For years, Theseus and Pirithous remained in this state of suspended animation, forgotten by the world they had left behind. It was only during the 12th labor of Heracles that the silence was finally interrupted. When Heracles descended to fetch Cerberus, he found his fellow heroes trapped in their stone chairs, Recognizing Theseus, Heracles reached out with his immortal strength to pull him free. The physical cost of this liberation was significant. The stone had fused so deeply with Theseus that as he was torn away, a portion of his flesh remained attached to the chair. This physical scar served as a lifelong reminder of his transgression, and it was said by some that his descendants in Athens were forever characterized by their lean and narrow thighs. But when Heracles turned to Pirithous, the earth responded with a deep, cavernous groan that shook the very foundations of the palace. The floor beneath the ebony throne cracked, and a shockwave of divine disapproval radiated from the king. Hades had determined that the debt of Pirithous was not yet paid. While Theseus had been led astray by his friend, Pirithous had been the mastermind, the one who had consciously intended to violate the queen. Heracles, who understood the limits of divine negotiation better than any other hero, felt the weight of the underworld pressing down on him. He realized that to take Pirithous was to invite a war with the abyss that even he could not win. With a heavy heart, Heracles desisted, leaving Pirithous to his eternal chair. This myth illustrates the absolute nature of Hades' territoriality. He does not seek to expand his realm through conquest, but he will not suffer the slightest encroachment upon what is his. The punishment of Theseus and Pirithous was not just about the kidnapping attempt. It was about the disrespect for the boundary between the living and the dead. Hades is the one who ensures that the unseen remains unseen. By trying to bring the Queen of the Shadows into the light, the heroes had tried to collapse the necessary distance that gives the cosmos its structure. The chair of forgetfulness was the king's way of saying that those who cannot respect the silence will be consumed by it. One must also consider the role of Persephone in this event. In many depictions, she is a silent observer of the hero's fate, her face a mask of iron that reflects the weight of her own crown. She did not plead for them, nor did she mock them. She understood that in the underworld, justice is a mechanical process. The heroes had walked into the trap of their own making, and the king was simply the one who allowed the mechanism to function. This story reinforced the fear that ordinary Greeks felt toward the underworld. It was a place where one could lose not just their life, but their very self. The loss of memory was the ultimate death, for a shade without a story is merely a wisp of smoke in the dark. The legacy of this myth remained a powerful warning for generations. It taught that even the greatest heroes are subject to the laws of the deep. It also added a layer of somber dignity to the character of Theseus, who returned to the light a changed man, sadder, wiser, and physically marked by his time in the dark. For Hades, the incident was just another day in the long eternity of his reign. He had defended his home, he had punished the arrogant, and he had returned to his silence. The chairs remained in the palace, empty or occupied, as the monuments to the fact that in the kingdom of the dead, every seat has a price, and every guest must eventually pay. The unseen king had once again proven that while he may be hospitable to the dead, he is a terrifying host to those who forget that they are still among the living. To the ancient Greeks, the name of Hades was a sound to be avoided, a frequency that vibrated too closely to the finality of the grave. Instead of speaking his name directly, they employed a vast array of epithets and euphemisms to refer to the king of the abyss. He was Clymenus, the renowned, Agesilaos, the leader of the people, and Polydegmon, the hospitable. But perhaps the most significant shift in his identity was the transition to Pluton, the Lord of Riches. This name, which later became the Roman Pluto, represented a profound understanding of the god's duality. Hades was not merely the warden of souls. He was the possessor of everything that lay beneath the surface of the earth. This included the veins of precious metals, the hidden gems, and most importantly, the seeds of the grain that had to descend into the dark before they could rise as life-giving food. This aspect of the god was seen as fertile rather than sterile, a being whose wealth provided the physical foundations of civilization. The cult of Hades was distinct from that of the Olympian gods who inhabited the sky and the sunlit peaks. While temples to Zeus or Athena were open and prominent, the places of worship for Hades were rare and often shrouded in mystery. The most significant cult center was in the region of Elis, in the western Peloponnese. According to the geographer Pausanias, the Eleans were the only people to have a temple specifically dedicated to Hades, but even this temple was governed by a strict and fearful protocol. It was opened only once a year, and even then, only the priest was permitted to enter the sacred space. The rest of the year, the doors remained sealed, reflecting the idea that the king of the dead does not seek the constant attention of the living. This ritual opening once a year symbolized the inevitable, single moment when every human must cross the threshold into his presence. In other parts of Greece, Hades was worshipped at sites called Plutonians, natural fissures, caves, or vents in the earth that were believed to be physical portals to the underworld. One of the most famous was located at Eleusis, near the sanctuary of Demeter and Persephone. Here, worshippers would offer sacrifices not with their eyes turned toward the sky, but with their gazes cast downward, toward the ground. The ritual practices for chthonic, or earthbound, deities were the inverse of Olympian sacrifices. When an animal was offered to Zeus, the victim's head was pulled upward, and the blood was spilled on an elevated altar. For Hades, the animal, invariably black, such as a black ram or a black ewe, was slaughtered over a pit or a trench called a bothros. The blood was allowed to soak directly into the soil, feeding the god and the spirits who dwelt in the silence below. The posture of the worshipper was also a manifestation of their fear and respect. When praying to Hades, the Greeks would not raise their hands toward the heavens. Instead, they would beat their palms against the earth, attempting to catch the attention of the god who sat beneath their feet. They would often avert their eyes, for to look directly at the symbols of death was to invite its arrival prematurely. This was a religion of avoidance and appeasement. People sought to keep Hades satisfied, so that he would stay in his realm and not emerge to disturb the order of the living. They recognized his absolute authority, but hoped to delay their encounter with him as long as possible. A unique and terrifying aspect of his cult was the necromantion, or the oracle of the dead. The most famous of these was located in Thesprotia, at the meeting point of the rivers Acheron, Cocytus, and Phlegethon. Here, the faithful would come to speak with the ghosts of their ancestors, or to seek hidden knowledge from the abyss. The process was long and arduous, involving days of isolation in dark, underground chambers, the consumption of ritual meals designed to induce a trance-like state, and elaborate ceremonies where the names of the dead were chanted into the silence. Worshippers believed that in these specific locations, the veil between the worlds was thin enough for a voice to pass through. Hades, as the master of the dead, was the one who permitted these communications, though he remained the silent overseer of the process, never appearing himself, but ensuring that the laws of the exchange were respected. The symbols associated with Hades in these cult contexts were rich with theological meaning. The bident, a two-pronged staff, was his most common weapon and scepter, while the trident of Poseidon represented the three parts of the world, or the power to shake the sea. The bident represented the duality of his nature, the power to both preserve and to judge, or perhaps the two paths that a soul could take at the crossroads. He was also frequently depicted with the cornucopia, or the horn of plenty, a symbol usually associated with abundance and fertility. In the hands of Hades, the cornucopia represented the Pluton aspect of his character, the idea that death and life are part of a singular economic system, where the earth gives back what it takes. This imagery helped to soften the terrifying image of the god, suggesting that he was not just the end of the journey, but also a source of life's renewal. Hades' relationship with the Eleusinian mysteries was also profound, though often understated. While the mysteries primarily focused on Demeter and Persephone, the abduction of the maiden was the central event that made the mysteries necessary. The Plutonian at Eleusis served as a stage for the ritual reenactment of the myth. The initiates would witness the descent and the return, learning that death was not a final destruction, but a change in state. Hades was the silent partner in this contract of hope. By accepting the compromise that allowed Persephone to return for part of the year, he had provided the first precedent for a soul's return, however seasonal, from the dark. This gave the initiates the courage to face their own inevitable descent, knowing that the king of the dead was a being with whom one could make a contract. The worship of Hades was also a way for the Greeks to process their collective grief and anxiety about the unknown. By giving the void a name, a palace, and a set of laws, they were making death manageable. They were domesticating the ultimate mystery. The silent cult of the unseen king was not a place of joy, but it was a place of profound honesty. In the presence of Hades, there was no room for the vanities of the sunlit world. Worshippers came to him when they had lost someone they loved, or when they felt the weight of their own mortality. They sought the stability that only he could provide. As the centuries passed, the figure of Hades began to merge more and more with the concept of Pluto, especially as Greek influence spread into the Roman world. The Romans embraced the idea of Dispater, the rich father, who was a more benevolent and accessible version of the Greek original. They built grander temples and included him in public festivals, focusing on the Zengenlik and the mineral wealth he provided. But the core of the god remained the same. He was the guardian of the final boundary. Whether he was called Hades, Pluton, or Pluto, he remained the one who watched over the earth's deepest secrets. The silent cult, with its black sheep and its averted eyes, was a reminder that while we live in the light, we are all ultimately the subjects of the unseen king. His wealth is our final resting place, and his hospitality is the only one that we are all destined to accept. In the end, the worship of Hades was the worship of reality itself, the recognition that for anything to grow and bloom, something must first be held in the quiet, nurturing dark of the underworld. The reign of Hades is defined by a singular, unyielding principle: the permanence of the boundary. In the house of the unseen king, there is no such thing as a temporary stay. Once the threshold is crossed and the soul is catalogued, the transaction is meant to be eternal. However, the mythology of the Greeks records moments when the brilliance of human ingenuity, or the complications of divine desire threatened to disrupt this sacred ledger. One of the most significant challenges to Hades' authority came not from a warrior or a thief, but from a healer. Asclepius, the son of Apollo, had achieved such mastery over the arts of medicine that he began to perform the impossible. He did not merely cure the sick or mend the wounded. According to the accounts in Pindar's Pythian odes, he began to bring the dead back to life. He restored the breath to those whose threads had already been cut by the fates, effectively snatching subjects from the kingdom of Hades and returning them to the world of the sun. Hades did not watch this development with indifference. For the Lord of the Dead, this was not an act of mercy, but a violation of the cosmic economy. If the dead could return at will, the meaning of life would be diluted, and the structure of the universe, built on the pillars of beginning and end, would collapse into chaos. Hades ascended from his dark palace and stood before the throne of Zeus on Olympus. He did not come with anger, but with a cold, logical complaint. He argued that his kingdom was being diminished, and that the laws of nature were being treated as suggestions. He reminded Zeus that the balance of the world required a destination that was final. Zeus, recognizing the validity of his brother's concern and fearing that humans might eventually learn to avoid death altogether, struck Asclepius down with a thunderbolt. The healer was transformed into a constellation, and the souls he had rescued were returned to the gray mists of the abyss. This incident reinforced Hades' role as the ultimate enforcer of the finality. He is the one who ensures that death remains a constant, protecting the value of life by guarding its end. Yet, even within the somber discipline of his life, there are flickers of a more personal, emotional landscape. The stories of Mintha and Lus provide a rare glimpse into the shadows of Hades' own heart. Mintha was a water nymph associated with the river Cocytus, a being of the dark currents who had caught the eye of the king before his marriage to Persephone. According to the accounts in Ovid's Metamorphoses, Mintha did not take the arrival of the new queen with grace. She boasted that she was more beautiful and more worthy of the Ebony Throne than the daughter of Demeter, and she whispered that she would eventually win back the king's favor. Persephone, who had grown into the iron-willed queen of the dead, did not tolerate this challenge to her authority. In a moment of divine wrath, she trampled the nymph into the earth, transforming her into the mint plant. Hades, unable to reverse the transformation, but wishing to preserve the memory of his former companion, granted the plant its distinctive, cooling fragrance, a scent that thrives in the damp, shaded places that mirror the underworld itself. The story of Luce is even more melancholic. She was an Oceanid, a daughter of Oceanus, whom Hades loved with a quiet intensity. He took her to his kingdom, but because she was a being of the light and the water, she could not endure the airless eternity of the deep. She died of natural causes within the underworld, a rare event for a divine nymph. To honor her and to keep her presence forever in his sight, Hades caused a white poplar tree to grow in the Elysian fields. This tree became sacred to him, its leaves shimmering with a silver underside that reflected the memory of the ocean's foam. When the hero Heracles descended to the underworld, he crowned himself with a wreath of white poplar leaves, the sweat of his labor turning the inner side of the leaves white, while the outer side remained dark. These myths of the nymphs show that Hades is not a machine of justice. He is a being capable of affection and grief. His palace is not just a courtroom. It is a home filled with the echoes of his own history. One must also consider the role of the Erinyes, or the Furies, in the daily governance of the palace. While they are often seen as independent entities, in the deepest traditions, they are the Alastors of Hades, the extensions of his will. They dwell in a silent chamber near the throne, waiting for the king to signal a violation of the natural law. They are particularly concerned with the crime of perjury and the shedding of family blood. When a mortal swears a false oath in the name of the gods, it is Hades who sends the Furies to haunt their dreams and sour their fortunes. He is the guardian of the Logos, the word that must be kept. In the underworld, the Furies act as the cleaners of the soul, stripping away the layers of self-deception, until only the raw truth of the crime remains. This partnership between the silent king and the screaming goddesses is the mechanism that keeps the moral world from spinning out of orbit. In the midst of these myths, the figure of Hades remains remarkably consistent. He does not change his mind, and he does not participate in the petty squabbles of the other gods. When the gates of the underworld are mentioned in the Iliad, they are described as the gates of the strong grasper, a title that emphasizes his inescapable hold. Yet, there is a certain comfort in this strength. In a universe where the gods are often capricious and unpredictable, Hades is the only one who is entirely reliable. He is the one who stays. He is the one who honors the contract. Whether he is dealing with a rogue healer like Asclepius, or a jealous nymph like Mintha, he applies the same standard of order and consequence. The presence of the black poplar and the scent of mint in the underworld are reminders that even in the place of death, there is a form of life. It is a life that has been transformed, a life that has found its final shape. Hades is the curator of these transformations. He understands that for a thing to be eternal, it must first be changed. The nymphs who became plants and trees are the perfect metaphors for the souls of the dead. They have lost their movement, but they have gained a permanence that the living can never know. As the king walks through his silent groves, he sees the history of his own heart reflected in the flora of the abyss. He is the lord of the dead, but he is also the gardener of the shadows, ensuring that every memory has a place to grow and every secret has a place to rest. The cosmic balance is not just a matter of numbers, it is a matter of respect for the journey of every living thing. And in the house of Hades, that journey is given the dignity of a final, beautiful conclusion. As the power of Greece began to fade, and the shadow of Rome stretched across the Mediterranean, the figure of Hades underwent a subtle but profound transformation. The Romans, ever the pragmatists, were less comfortable with the raw, terrifying finality of the Greek Hades. They looked for a way to integrate the master of the dead into a system that emphasized the continuity of the family and the prosperity of the state. They began to focus almost exclusively on the Pluton aspect of his character, reimagining him as Pluto, or Dispater, the rich father. This Roman Pluto was a more majestic and less frightening figure, often depicted with a softer expression and surrounded by symbols of agricultural and mineral wealth. He became the god who presided over the hidden energy of the earth, the one who ensured that the gold remained in the mines and the grain remained in the granaries until they were needed. This transition was not merely a change in name. It was a shift in the human relationship with the end of life. For the Romans, Pluto was a god who could be approached with a sense of solemn contract. They viewed the underworld as a vast, well-ordered estate, a reflection of the Roman Empire itself. The transition from the Greek unseen one to the Roman rich father reflected a society that was becoming more concerned with the legacy and the preservation of wealth. However, the core of the myth remained intact. Whether he was called Hades or Pluto, the god was still the one who guarded the threshold. He still possessed the helm of darkness, and he still sat beside the Iron Queen, Persephone, whom the Romans called Proserpina. The fundamental necessity of the god did not change, even as his outward appearance became more draped in the velvet of Roman authority. In the philosophical traditions of the Stoics and the Epicureans, the figure of Hades took on an even deeper symbolic meaning. The Stoics viewed him as a representation of the pneuma that returns to the earth, a manifestation of the rational order of the universe that demands an end to every individual cycle. They saw the underworld not as a place of suffering, but as a place of rest from the turbulence of the passions. To the Stoic mind, Hades was the ultimate philosopher-king, the one who lived in perfect accordance with nature, because he was nature's final law. The Epicureans, on the other hand, used the image of Hades to argue against the fear of death. They taught that the hell described by the poets was actually a metaphor for the anxieties of the living world. The Tantalus who thirsts is the man consumed by greed. The Sisyphus who rolls the stone is the man trapped in political ambition. By reinterpreting the myths of Hades, they sought to liberate the human spirit from the terror of the unseen. Yet, despite these intellectual reinterpretations, the ancient image of the silent god with the bident remains the most powerful. The legacy of Hades is found in the very architecture of our subconscious. He is the guardian of the things we do not want to see, the representative of the shadow that exists within every individual and every society. To respect Hades is to recognize that life is defined by its limits. In a modern world that often tries to deny the reality of death or to hide it behind the walls of hospitals and statistics, the myth of Hades reminds us that the end is a sacred space. It is the place where the truth is finally told and the weight of a life is finally measured. The Obsidian Palace is the destination toward which every story is moving, and the king is the one who ensures that the journey has a meaning. The symbols of Hades, the cypress tree, the screech owl, the key, and the helm, continue to resonate in our cultural language. The cypress still stands in the cemeteries of the Mediterranean, a living connection to the God who never changes. The screech owl remains a harbinger of the transition, a voice from the twilight that speaks of the unseen world. And the key of Hades is the most profound symbol of all. It is the key that locks the past and unlocks the future, the instrument that maintains the boundaries of our existence. Hades is the god who holds the key to the universe's most important secret, that for anything to be truly valuable, it must be finite. As we conclude this deep descent into the heart of the abyss, we see that Hades is perhaps the most misunderstood of all the gods. He is not the enemy of life, but its silent partner. He is the one who provides the canvas upon which the colors of our days are painted. Without the darkness of his realm, the light of the sun would have no contrast. Without the silence of his halls, the music of Orpheus would have no depth. He is the Lord of riches, because he knows that the greatest wealth is not found in the things we possess, but in the time we are given, and the legacy we leave behind in the memory of the world. The king of the dead sits upon his ebony throne, his hands resting on his scepter, watching the eternal flow of the rivers. He is not lonely, for he is the host of all humanity. He is not cruel, for he is the administrator of perfect justice. He is simply the one who remains when everyone else has gone home. He is the giver of rest, the unseen foundation, and the silent guardian. As the seasons change and the maiden Persephone returns once more to the world of the sun, Hades remains in his palace, content to wait. He knows that the cycle will bring her back to him, just as it will eventually bring every soul to his gates. And when that time comes, the king will be there, as he has been since the beginning of the world, to offer the hospitality of the shadows and the peace of the eternal silence. If you have found a sense of calm and curiosity in this journey through the unseen realm, I invite you to join our circle at the hearth, to stay connected with the ancient whispers of mythology, and to explore the legends that have shaped the human spirit. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Your presence helps keep the embers of these stories burning bright in the modern world. Like this narrative, if it brought you a moment of reflection, and share your thoughts in the comments. Perhaps there is a myth or a figure you wish to see emerge from the shadows in our next gathering. Until then, may your path be clear, and may you find beauty even in the quietest corners of the world. Thank you for journeying with me through the sunless depths, from the judgment crossroads to the eternal peace of Elysium. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the complete life of Hades, and if you found peace in the presence of the silence, please leave a like and subscribe to Hearths of Myths. Sleep well.